Looking at as though this was a disc, like a CD, this was plotted into the computer using the ASCII code, and it actually comes up with a message, and it says, now, I'm sure many of you have seen this before. This is one of the incredible crop formations that appeared at Crabwood near Winchester in Hampshire. This was in August 2002. This was the third year in a series of crop formations that appeared that were very much a SETI communication. The first two appeared near Chilbolton Radio Telescope in 2000 and then 2001, which gave a very clear SETI communication. And then the third year here, just 8 miles down the road when this formation appeared, and this was appeared underneath a bank of microwave towers. And the SETI program looks into the microwave spectrum as well as the radio spectrum. Now, again, the more that you look at this, and certainly the further back you are if you squint your eyes, it becomes very clear, very third-dimensional, a photographically real image. And yet this is just made of many, many lines of depressed crop. Give you an idea of how big this is, it's about 350 feet. Right at the top, you see that the car up there parked on the road, so it gives you a good idea of the size of some of these formations. But the fact that you even have sort of shading on the right cheek, again, I don't know how that was created, but very photographically real. Possibly the 3 dots above the shoulder are meant to represent UFOs in the distance. But the incredible thing is, it looks as though this being is holding up a disc. Now, this appeared around about the 25th anniversary of the Voyager probe, the one that went out into space that had that golden disc on board, with people speaking, music playing, children talking, and greetings in 54 Earth languages. So I think the timing was very apt. Now, some people who look at that say that these are just circles, but in fact, that is a spiral of crop that runs from the center in an anti-clockwise direction and then comes all the way out until it comes out at the bottom there. Now, I actually walked that, and that took me about 15 or 20 minutes to walk that spiral. So that must be the equivalent of about a mile in length. So you can imagine how difficult that would be to do. It's hard enough to do a spiral in a computer, let alone on a sloping field as that is, during the middle of the night with ropes and planks of wood. It's just not possible to do a spiral in crop, let alone one as complex as this. And as I say, it becomes even more complex because if you look at the dark areas, they are all standing crop, which comes up to about the top of your thigh, and then all the light areas are laid crop. But wherever you are within that spiral, the laid crop all points into the center. So it's very, very well constructed, but complicated. So looking at as though this was a disc, like a CD, this was plotted into the computer using the ASCII code, and it actually comes up with a message. And it says, "Beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain but still time. Believe there is good out there. We oppose deception. Conduit closing." And of course that is an incredibly powerful message. Now there are many people who study UFOs and ETs, and some people think that the Greys are actually here to help us as we're going through these technological and environmental changes. Other people feel they are actually like the message. They are the classic deceivers, and they are taking material from us. They're not to be trusted. Now, I personally would go along with the latter. I would not trust these beings. But again, as we go through this process, once disclosure happens, which it will, so the people of the world can know that UFOs and ETs exist, people are going to have to sort of look at this within their own hearts, how they feel about the different type of beings that are interacting with us. And there are many, and it is very complex. But I say, it will all come down to the individual in the end. But certainly for myself, I would not trust these beings. And certainly, if we're talking about a spiritual reality as well, if one of these beings comes towards you brandishing a probe, you're not thinking pretty high spiritual thoughts, are you? Let's face it. Now, there is more than enough evidence to show that the reptilians are also working with the Greys, or the Greys work for them. Again, many abductees often see both these types working together, so there's more than enough evidence to show that. But certainly, as far as the abduction phenomena is concerned, there are probably one of the world's leading researchers into that was the late Bud Hopkins. Did some incredible research into the alien abduction phenomena. His research began where he started studying the missing time element as people were having UFO encounters. Then they would return home, say driving home, find that they'd returned home something like an hour and a half or 2 hours later than they thought they should have done, and began to realize that that missing time element must have been when they went on board the craft. So Bud Hopkins trained as a hypnotherapist and started to uncover what was going on in that missing time element when people were going on board and having certain medical procedures done to them, genetic material removed, etc. He ended up writing about this as missing time. Over a period of time, he ended up working with over 1,000 abductees from around the world. And one of the most important cases that he studied was the abduction of this particular lady, using the pseudonym of Linda Cortile. This was an abduction that happened in downtown New York on the 30th of November 1989. But it's a really important case because it involved many witnesses to it, including certain world leaders and political figures. Now, Bud was already working with Linda as an abductee. She'd been abducted over her life, and it was now happening to her children. So, she was getting more and more concerned about this. So about 3 o'clock in the morning on the 30th of November 89, she had the abduction. She then contacted Bud later that day and met him later on to talk about what had happened. And he did the hypnotic regression on some of the aspects she couldn't remember, filed it away as a report similar to many others, of course, these abduction processes. But what was amazing is, over the next few weeks and months, Bud was then contacted by various people from different places within New York that had actually seen this abduction. And it started to build up this incredible case known as the Witness case, or the Brooklyn Bridge abduction case. Now, just to give you an idea of where this actually occurred, this is a picture that I took of downtown New York, strangely enough from one of the Twin Towers, actually. But where it happened is, again, I can't point the laser, but if you look at those brown buildings to the left of the Brooklyn Bridge, 3 o'clock in the morning, 30 November 1989, suddenly within that area, all the power cut out, lights went out, but then the engines and cars were cutting out as well, so cars were grinding to a halt. This often happens with UFO interactions. They can actually cut the electrical fields of things like cars, houses, or even military bases. But anyway, the cars would sort of grind to a halt. People were getting out of their cars wondering what was going on, when suddenly they saw a bright UFO hovering over one of these buildings. Then a beam of light shining down. 4 little figures came out of the 12th floor apartment where she lived. They were initially curled up in a fetal position, which is really strange, and many of the witnesses were saying this. Again, this is something you just wouldn't make up, but they were all corroborating that fact. They then straightened up, beamed up into the craft. The craft then took off, flew over the Brooklyn Bridge, and then dropped into the East River beyond. Again, people in a state of shock, as you can imagine, what they'd just seen. But then the lights started to come back on. People found they could start their cars and continue with their journey in that state of shock. Now, as I say, Bud was contacted by many different witnesses from that. One of them was a lady known as Janet Kimball. Now, she was driving from Brooklyn into downtown New York over the Brooklyn Bridge when the same thing happened to her. She said the power cut out, the car engines cut out, and all the cars ground to a halt on the bridge. So people were actually getting out of their cars, as you can imagine, wondering what on earth was going on, when suddenly they looked down, and her top drawing shows, as she looked through the structure of the Brooklyn Bridge, she saw this bright illuminated UFO. The second drawing shows the 4 little figures curled up in that fetal position, and then the third drawing here, as they straightened up, you can see the 4 figures there with the human, the lady in the middle, and what are 3 greys around the outside. They then beamed up into the craft. The craft then took off, flew over the Brooklyn Bridge. She said she actually felt static electricity as it passed over. Her hair stood on end, and then the craft dropped into the river beyond. Once again, eventually the lights came back on, and people found they could start their cars and continue with their journey in that state of shock. Now, this is where this stepped up to a much higher level. On the 30th of November 1989 was a really important day in world politics. This is the time when the Berlin Wall itself was actually falling. the Russian state was collapsing. There were major things happening around the world. On that very day, President Gorbachev met Pope John Paul II, and this is the first time a Russian president had actually met a pope in about 70 years. The following day, Bush Sr. Met Gorbachev in Malta. So there was a lot of stuff going on. So leading up, the night before this, there was a big meeting happening at the United Nations building involving certain world leaders and political figures. And the meetings went into the early hours of the morning when they left it in a cavalcade of black limousines driving from the UN building to go down to the southern tip of Manhattan where they were staying on Governor's Island. And the same thing is, they actually got caught up with this as well. So they tend not to use bridges or expressways for security reasons, so they were on street level, much closer to this when this happened. And same thing, the lights went out, the engines cut out on this cavalcade of black limousines, and this was involving people like Lech Wałęsa, the Polish leader, and the UN Secretary General were involved in this cavalcade. The cars cut out. These drawings here have come from a guy called Richard, and from research it showed that he was actually the NSA guy, the National Security Agent guarding the UN Secretary General when this happened. They were much closer, so they could see the craft right above them as they ground to a halt in their cars. Initially, as he drew, because he contacted Bud about this, Bud being a well-known figure on this subject in New York. And his drawing, as other people did as well, showed them initially curled up in that fetal position, which again was really strange. Then they straightened up, all facing in their general direction, and then they beamed up into the craft. The craft then took off and then flew off over the bridge and into the river beyond. Now, in fact, there's a lot more to this story than I'm telling you here. It's a very deep, incredible story, but just the general feeling is that what happened here was this was a demonstration that was done there to let these world leaders know that this is a reality. So behind the scenes, they were fully aware of this, and as you can well imagine what they would have spoken about behind the scenes. Even though this doesn't come out in the mainstream media, they'll certainly still be talking about it. They showed the ability of these beings, and that it was definitely a demonstration. Now, the more that you look into the UFO and ET reality, it's very clear that there are, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, it's sort of some of the things that happen definitely go beyond our taught laws of physics. And this is part of the problem when discussing UFO interactions within mainstream society and science. Some incredible things that happen. Obviously the implants, and I'll just mention that again in a minute, where many abductees show that they have small metal implants within their body, which seem to be tracking devices. This again is much easier to discuss nowadays, now that we're tracking and tagging or implanting our own animals and pets, etc. You've got the scoop marks on the body where flesh is removed with no scarring or scab. It's believed that that is using genetic material to cover the implant so you don't have inflammatory response. The missing time element, as ever, many abductees that have that missing time, and they have this sort of hypnotic sort of block for what actually occurred, which is often when masked memories are used as though the person had something different that happened to them rather than a UFO encounter. And very relevant to the case that I just spoke about is the fact that many abductees are transported through solid objects. You can either be beamed through a window, through a roof, a ceiling, or even the metal roof of a car. And Linda Cortile, in the case I just spoke about, she was actually on the 12th floor apartment. She was beamed through the glass of her window, but she also had a metal grill on the window so that when the windows were open, the children wouldn't fall out. So she felt herself pass through the glass and the metal of that. This again boggles the mind of what sort of physics we're talking about here. Possibly, certainly, quantum theory is starting to look more into this in a way, in the fact that at subatomic level, it's recognized that everything is energy. In fact, nothing really is solid. So that starts to make more sense in a way when you're talking about this type of interaction. You've got the missing pregnancies that come with abduction, and of course the psychological trauma that comes with that as well. Translocation, similar to the other one, where people can be driving along in a car, they'll have a UFO interaction, and then the next thing they find that they're on another road, sort of groggy, and realise they're in a completely different location. I've spoken to people that this has happened to, and the car, it's as though they and the car has all been transported to this new location. You've certainly got the waking up in bed in the wrong clothes or with muddy feet or outside their locked house, the compulsion to go to a certain location, even if they're afraid to do so, and burns and nausea that can come from close proximity to landed craft. All of these things adding weight to the evidence of these interactions that are happening. Now, certainly as far as the implant process is concerned, some incredible research by the late Dr. Roger Lear. He was a podiatric surgeon from California, did some amazing work working with abductees, where he actually worked with 17 abductees, removing about 20 implants, one of those up on the top right, as you can see. They found on laboratory research that the implants themselves were coated in what was like keratin, and keratin is the stuff that our skin or our nails or our hair is made of. So the general feeling was that they were coating it in the person's own genetic material so that they didn't have the inflammatory response. This is something that Dr. Roger Lear said. It is really unusual. Any foreign object within the body will always have inflammatory response. I mean, if you think of getting a splinter, you know yourselves how the body inflames. And yet they didn't have any inflammatory response. Some of these implants were actually linked into the nerves within the body. When they actually looked at the metal components, they were made of different types of metals in a way constructed in a way that we don't normally see on Earth. And they also had an isotopic ratio that did not come from Earth. So this was showing that these implants are of an extraterrestrial origin. And it backed up the fact that the belief is that they are used as tracking devices, possibly to register the metabolism of a person, or even a little bit more scary, possibly as a remote influencing device. Now, another area, when we're talking about the extraterrestrial reality, rather than the spiritual reality, of course, is there you go, that's scary. That's what happens with a scary subject. The animal and cattle mutilations, of course, and one of the world's leading researchers into the animal mutilations, as we know, is Linda Moulton Howe. In this country, people like David Caton and Rich Hall done a huge amount of research into this, showing that these animals are not predated. This is the wounds from these animals is not from predation, and it's very much surgically precise what's happening to these beings and the removal of certain organs, etc. Now, in Colonel Phil Corso, he was a gentleman that was working in the early 1960s at the Pentagon in the Army's Research and Development Department in what they called the Foreign Technology Division. And it was his job, he said, to take some of the technology from the crashed UFO at Roswell from 1947 and to seed that technology into the mainstream industries through the government contracting programs. Technology like silicon chip, fiber optics, night vision, Kevlar, microcircuitry, lasers, things like this, that supposedly came from UFO technology, seeded through corporations like IBM, Monsanto, General Electric, into mainstream industry. And it sort of makes sense in the way we see how our technology has sort of blossomed and skyrocketed within the last few decades. But in regards to animal mutilations, he also spoke about this, and he actually said that animal mutilations were done by EBIs, extraterrestrial biological entities, and that they, the military, were aware of this since at least the early 1950s. He said EBIs were harvesting the digestive, mammary and reproductive organs, also draining all the bodily fluids and blood. Their laser surgery had virtually no inflammatory response, in a way same as the implants. The general feeling is that the ovum and fluids are used as part of the hybridization program that's going on. Now again, I highlight this in the last few slides to highlight this sort of the ufological and extraterrestrial interactions in this particular case are very much to do with the physical, genetic material and the use of genetic material as part of that hybridization program. Once again, this isn't what I would regard as a sort of divine or holy or spiritual interactions. Now, to then highlight that side of things, what is incredible, I've been researching the crop formations for 19, 20 years in depth. Was part of one of the early research groups where we used to take material from crop formations, sending them to be tested in the States, and finding out that many of the genuine formations were going through a change in their cellular structure. This is not created by guys with ropes and planks of wood, the genuine formations. Although nowadays there's a lot more hoaxes, unfortunately. But if we're to talk about a sort of a high divine or spiritual reality, what is amazing is that over the years, some of the crop formations also highlighted this as well. And this was a classic example of that. This amazing formation appeared on the 7th of July 2007 in the East Field in Alton Barnes in Wiltshire. And this is one of the mecca places where some of the most amazing formations appeared over about a 30-year period, really. This is the classic example. This is a massive formation. It's about 1,000 feet long by 500 feet wide. And in fact, if you look up at the top left, you'll see two little dots walking down the tram line. There are people walking into that. This formation is about the same size as the Eiffel Tower. It's absolutely vast. But what's incredible is when this appeared, there were a group of people doing a night watch, and they were using ordinary cameras and infrared cameras, looking down at that field, and there was nothing there. Then basically during the night, it got dark, completely dark, and at the middle of the night, there was a bright flash of light which illuminated the whole of the valley, and it actually sent an electromagnetic spike into the infrared camera. As it then started to get light, which was only about an hour and a half time frame at that time of year, they could then see this massive formation there. Generally, they felt that the formation appeared probably in a matter of minutes. So what is amazing, though, if you look from this side, as you look at that formation, it actually is the symbol that relates to Om. And Om relates to the total consciousness of God, everything there ever was, is, and shall be, from waking consciousness to dreaming consciousness to sleeping consciousness. But also, the fact that this appeared on the 7th of July 2007, that is 777. Now, in numerology, 777 relates to the ascension process. And we're talking the ascension, like the ascension of Christ to a higher dimensional level. So this is an amazingly powerful formation that appeared in a flash of light relating to the consciousness of God and the ascension process. So if you look at the formation like that, as you can see, it's very much like the Om symbol. But the Om also relates to the self, to the eternal self, where you have like the lower self based out of the solar plexus chakra in the middle there, and then you have up to the crown chakra, and then beyond the dot that represents the eternal self or the higher self. So this was an amazing formation. I mean, there'd been many others, but this one's really taking this up to a high level, trying to acknowledge a divine consciousness of God in all things, the ascension process, but also the eternal self as well. So the following year, as if to also acknowledge this sort of higher spiritual reality, this amazing crucifix appeared. This appeared on the 14th of August 2008 near Etchelhampton, which is near Devizes in Wiltshire. And as you look at that, the more you study that, the more complex it is. But you'll see it's incredibly accurate and beautiful, basically to the millimetre. Over the years, there have been many formations that have appeared that represent different religious symbols as well. Even the Tree of Life in the Kabbalah appeared. Also, a formation that relates to revelation or a revealing in the Native American tradition. So lots of these different formations are appearing, highlighting these sort of higher spiritual reality. But this one certainly was doing that as well. And just to give you an idea of the size of this is another amazing photograph by Steve Alexander from temporarytemples.co.uk. It's a huge formation. It's about 600 feet across and about 800 feet in length. The little black dot in the middle there is actually a person standing in the formation. It's the equivalent of about 2.5 football pitches in length. Absolutely vast, these formations.